That would be the last time Arthur Whitfield laughed for a very, very long time. Because 3 weeks later, when his attorneys called an emergency meeting to inform him that he no longer owned the patents to his own company's core technology, his face went the color of the Arctic ice I'd used for his whiskey every night for a decade. His hands, those surgeon-steady hands that signed billion-dollar contracts without a tremor, started shaking so badly he dropped his Mont Blanc pen. And me, standing in the shadows of that same boardroom where he discarded me like outdated hardware, I smiled for the first time in 3 years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand how a woman everyone assumed was just expensive decoration actually built the empire her husband thought he owned. Before we continue with the story, be sure to subscribe to the channel and give the video a like. Oh, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. We love seeing that. My name is Cindy Thompson. I'm 36 years old, and until 8 weeks ago, I was Mrs. Arthur Whitfield, the polished, silent accessory to a tech billionaire's public image. 10 years of marriage. That's 3,650 days of board dinners where I smiled and said nothing. 520 weeks of standing by my man while he stood on my ideas, and exactly 87,600 hours longer than my dignity should have allowed. But I'm a patient woman. I get it from my mother, who taught me that revenge is a dish best served cold, calculated, and legally bulletproof. I met Arthur when I was 26, already 3 years into my career as a systems architect at Brennan Industrial Solutions. I wasn't filing papers or answering phones. I was designing proprietary logistics algorithms that saved Fortune 500 companies millions in supply chain inefficiencies. Arthur was 32, a mid-level consultant with excellent hair, better suits, and the kind of confidence that couldn't distinguish between ambition and delusion. He talked about disrupting the tech industry like he'd invented the concept. I talked about mathematical optimization models. He said he was going to build the next Amazon. I said I could show him how to actually route packages efficiently. Romance, right? We got married when I was 28, right as Arthur's fledgling logistics startup finally secured Series A funding. He asked me to join the company full-time as Chief Strategy Officer. No equity, he explained, because investors preferred clean cap tables. But we were married, so what was his would be mine, right? For the next 8 years, I became the invisible engine of Whitfield Technologies. I built the route optimization AI that became our flagship product. I personally negotiated the contracts with our first 12 enterprise clients. I designed the acquisition strategy that absorbed 4 competitors and made us a unicorn by year 5. My official title was Arthur's Wife and Strategic Advisor. My actual job was being the brain he borrowed every time he walked into a boardroom. And somewhere between our third acquisition and our second penthouse, between the private jet and the Vogue profile calling him the logistics visionary, I realized something my mother had warned me about. Brilliant women don't get remembered in someone else's story. They get erased. For 10 years, my reflection never made it into the company photos. In every glossy profile of Arthur Whitfield, there I stood at the edge of the frame, blurred by lighting, or conveniently cropped at the shoulder. They called him a visionary, a self-made genius, a disruptor who had rewritten the future of logistics. No one mentioned the woman who sat at the kitchen table at 2 in the morning, sketching algorithms on the back of credit card bills while his name went on every patent. I learned early that shadow work is quieter, but not weaker. At first, I believed anonymity was the price of love. I told myself we were a team, that a shared bank account and a shared bed meant shared credit. When he said, "You're incredible, Cindy, but investors need one face to rally behind," I swallowed the sting and adjusted his tie before every pitch. He stood under the spotlights, and I sat 3 rows back, correcting his projections on the fly via text. The empire grew on a steady diet of my caution and his recklessness. I forecasted risk. He announced bold moves. I drafted strategies. He delivered them as off-the-cuff inspiration. He shook hands in tailored suits while I waited outside boardrooms with a tablet, revising numbers in real time so his bravado didn't bankrupt us. When deals closed, he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Couldn't have done it without you," then walked into interviews alone. There is a special kind of invisibility reserved for women whose work is called support. People saw my sharp bob, my tailored black blazers, and decided I was decoration. They mistook my silence for emptiness, not calculation. I let them. It is easier to move pieces on a board when everyone assumes you are just part of the furniture. Over a decade, I watched his confidence swell into entitlement. The more the world applauded him, the more he believed his own mythology. He stopped asking, "What do you think?" and started saying, "Just make it happen." I did. I always did. But with every solution I delivered, I kept a copy. With every patent, every acquisition, every buried clause, I built a map only I could read. Ghostwriters know the story better than the name on the cover. One day, I realized I was not just authoring Arthur's success. I was cataloging the exact moment the story would stop being his. The gala lights glittered like shattered diamonds across the Whitfield Tower ballroom, casting long shadows over crystal flutes and designer gowns. I'd chosen this night carefully, the annual investor showcase where Arthur always shone brightest, announcing our latest acquisition to thunderous applause. He stood at the podium now, his voice smooth as aged bourbon, promising, quote, disruptive growth, while the board beamed and champagne flowed. Then she appeared on his arm. Not a colleague, not a client. Her, a socialite half my age, with influencer-perfect hair and a dress that screamed borrowed wealth. 24, I'd later learn, fresh from some reality show, clutching Arthur's elbow like a trophy. The room noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd as he paraded her past familiar faces, past the executives who dined at our table for years. She laughed too loudly at his jokes, her hand lingering on his lapel. I stood near the edge, black gown hugging my frame, blue eyes scanning the exits as protocol demanded. Smile. Nod. Be the poised wife. But inside, the math shifted. Variables I'd tracked for months aligned. The late nights, the offshore transfers disguised as consulting fees, the deleted calendar invites. This wasn't impulse. This was choreography. Halfway through his speech, Arthur caught my eye from the stage. A nod to his assistant, and suddenly a liveried server approached, envelope in hand. "Mrs. Whitfield," he murmured, passing it discreetly. "Divorce papers. Gold embossed, notarized, citing irreconcilable differences, and a prenup I'd signed in optimism. Assets frozen pending settlement. My name, scrubbed from the empire's ledgers." The room spun with congratulations for Arthur's visionary milestone. As I slipped the papers into my clutch, his mistress raised a glass beside him, oblivious. He scanned the crowd once more, found me, and offered the faintest smirk, the predator's assurance of victory. I raised my own glass in silent toast, composure absolute. Let them see the discarded wife. Let him believe the gala marked my obsolescence. Every eye on him meant no one watched the architect slip away, calculations complete. The disposal had begun, but disposals require waste management. And I'd already sorted the recyclables. They came on a Tuesday, which felt almost rude in its ordinariness. No dramatic storm, no thunder rolling over the city. Just a gray morning and 3 members of Arthur's executive staff waiting in the foyer of our penthouse with clipboards and apologetic smiles. Behind them, 2 building attendants wheeled in stacks of flattened cardboard boxes and a roll of thick black garbage bags, the industrial kind usually reserved for construction sites. Mrs. Whitfield, Melissa, Arthur's chief of staff, said carefully, as if the wrong word might set off an alarm, "We've been instructed to help you transition your personal belongings." Her eyes flicked to the signed divorce petition on the console table, then away. "We'll, separate anything that belongs to the company." Translation, everything he cared about. They moved with the efficiency I had trained into his organization. Suits disappeared from the walk-in closet, tagged and logged. Jewelry cases opened and closed, pieces scanned against an insurance inventory that somehow no longer bore my name. Art came off the walls, bubble-wrapped and labeled for storage. Even the monogrammed towels were noted as Whitfield assets. Sentimental items stay, Melissa said, reading from her instructions. Photographs, letters, personal mementos. The word tasted like condescension. In the bedroom, one of the younger assistants hesitated over my collection of couture dresses. "These are on the corporate card list," she murmured, almost to herself, before sealing them into a box marked with the company logo. My life, reduced to line items and budget codes. By noon, the penthouse looked like a stage being struck after the final performance. Bare shelves, empty hangers, indentations in the carpet where furniture had stood. What remained was a strange museum of what Arthur thought worthless. A chipped ceramic mug from my first job, a stack of dog-eared notebooks, my grandmother's old wooden jewelry box, a shoebox of printed photos, a few books whose spines he'd never once read. Melissa gestured to the survivors. "These are all yours," she said, relieved to have something she could give instead of take. The attendants had already wheeled away the labeled crates and garment bags. Near the door, a single black garbage bag sagged with the rest. Scarves, a worn sweater, a framed degree. He had taken the jets, the art, the wardrobe, the public story of our life. He'd left me the footnotes. I tied the garbage bag, picked up the wooden box, and smiled to myself. Subjects underestimate what can be built from what they throw away. 18 months before Arthur's laughter echoed across that boardroom, I discovered his secret while debugging an encryption error in the company's patent management system. The file should not have been there, buried 3 directories deep inside what looked like archived vendor contracts. But there it was, labeled with the kind of bland corporate title designed to discourage curiosity. IP_transfer_strategic_restructure_draft_final. I opened it at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, sitting in the study while Arthur entertained clients in Monaco. The document was meticulous, the kind of legal architecture that takes months and expensive attorneys to construct. Shell companies layered like nesting dolls, each registered to offshore jurisdictions with impenetrable privacy laws. At the center, a trust structure designed to funnel every core patent out of Whitfield Technologies and into entities that bore Arthur's signature but not mine. The algorithms I had written, the logistics protocols I had optimized, the AI routing systems that made us billions, all of it, systematically reclassified as derivative works authored by Arthur Whitfield, CEO, with supporting documentation backdated to meetings I had never attended. I read the entire file twice, my coffee going cold beside the keyboard. There were email threads I had never seen, memos referencing conversations that had never happened, affidavits from engineers I had personally trained swearing that Arthur had conceptualized and directed innovations I could prove I had coded myself. He had spent over a year building a legal fiction that erased me from the intellectual foundation of the empire. The most elegant detail was the exit account, a private fund labeled Post-Transition Capital Reserve. It held $340 million, earmarked for Arthur's new life after the company sale he was quietly negotiating. The buyer's name was redacted, but the timeline was clear. 18 months to finalize the patents, 12 months to close the acquisition, 6 months to marry his replacement. I was always good with timelines. I logged out, cleared the cache, and closed the laptop. My hands did not shake. The horror had already crystallized into something sharper. Arthur believed he was rewriting history. He had no idea I had just downloaded the original manuscript, along with proof that every revision was fraud. The jewelry box had lived on my dresser for years, without attracting attention. Small, square, its varnish dulled by time, it looked like the kind of heirloom people keep out of obligation rather than affection. Arthur had called it quaint once, glancing past it on his way to the safe where he stored watches and documents that actually mattered to him. That was exactly why it became the most valuable object in the penthouse. The night after I found the transfer scheme, I carried the box to my desk and turned it over in my hands. My grandmother had used it for costume jewelry and folded notes. I used calipers and a flashlight. The base was thicker than it needed to be. Old carpenters were practical. They did not waste wood. I ran my thumb along the inside seam until I felt the slightest ridge, almost imperceptible, where the lining met the frame. It took 3 evenings, a set of precision tools, and the excuse of late-night work to avoid Arthur's questions. When the false bottom finally lifted, it revealed a shallow cavity the size of a paperback. Not much space, but enough. Enough if every item inside was chosen carefully, ruthlessly. First came the hardware. A custom encrypted drive, cloned and scrubbed until it held only what mattered. Every trace of Arthur's offshore entities. Every draft of the patent reassignment agreements. The full chain of emails and metadata linking his strategic restructure to outright fraud. Then the originals. Notarized assignments I had executed quietly, years earlier, vesting my core algorithms in a personal holding company that predated Whitfield Technologies. On paper, those titles looked harmless. Tucked together with my grandmother's old brooch, a faded photograph, and a string of fake pearls, they looked like clutter. I rehearsed the ritual until it became muscle memory. Drive in its antistatic sleeve. Documents in acid-free folders, edges aligned. False bottom pressed back into place with a firm, even pressure. Lid closed. Latch turned. From the outside, nothing had changed. For months, while Arthur moved money and rehearsed his exit, my own kill switch sat in plain sight, covered in dust and sentiment. Every time his staff walked past it, carrying in new paintings, or boxing up my life for donation, the box remained. Invisible, unremarkable, waiting for the day he would finally decide it was all I was worth. Mediation took place in a windowless conference room that smelled faintly of burnt coffee and recycled air. It was the opposite of the life Arthur liked to project. No glass walls, no skyline view, just beige carpet and a ticking clock. He sat at one end of the table, flanked by 2 attorneys in matching navy suits. I sat at the other with a single lawyer who kept glancing at me, as if waiting for the moment I would finally break. Arthur did not wait. He started with a sigh loud enough to register as performance. "Let's be efficient," he said, folding his hands. "Cindy understands the prenuptial agreement. She leaves with her personal effects. No alimony, no equity. We avoid a messy trial. Everyone moves on. Everyone. As if we were teammates rearranging a calendar, not dismantling a decade of my life." The mediator, a calm woman with tired eyes, outlined options. We could contest the prenup. We could argue contribution, intellectual property, marital assets. Each path came with months of litigation, discovery, scrutiny. Arthur's lawyers nodded along, confident. They knew the numbers on paper favored him. They did not know about the numbers stored on a quiet drive in a wooden box. My attorney leaned close. "We can fight this," he whispered. "You have grounds." I thought of the algorithms he had already tried to steal, the offshore accounts, the secret sale he believed was invisible. I thought of the kill switch, patient and silent in my grandmother's box. A public battle would only give him time to adjust, to call in favors, to patch holes I had so carefully documented. "I appreciate it," I said softly, "but I am not interested in a war over scraps." My voice carried just enough to reach Arthur. His lips curled, almost pitying. "See?" he said to the mediator. "She wants a clean break. Cindy has always been reasonable." The settlement terms were read into the record. $0. No claim on the company. No spousal support. Personal items only. On paper, I looked like a woman who had been bullied into surrender, too tired or too fragile to fight. When it was my turn to speak, I folded my hands and met Arthur's eyes. "I accept," I said. "I wish you and your future endeavors the very best." He relaxed, shoulders dropping, victory settling over him like a custom suit. In his mind, the story ended here, with the gracious loser exiting the stage. But gracious is not the same as defeated. It is simply what strategy looks like when the real battle is already won, quietly, somewhere he has not thought to look. The first time I saw the rebrand, it was on a billboard I had commissioned 3 years earlier. Whitfield Technologies used to live in deep cobalt and clean white, a palette I chose because it suggested precision and velocity. Now the background was a muted gray, the logo flattened into something that looked like a generic consulting firm. The new tagline read, "Reinventing Tomorrow." Vague, safe, empty. Her touch was everywhere. Arthur's new wife had been a socialite 6 months ago and was now chief brand curator, according to the business magazine that ran a spread on their wedding/strategy launch. In the photos, she stood at his side in a tailored suit, pointing at mood boards while executives nodded. She talked about softening the edges and modernizing the narrative. I read every quote twice. Nowhere did she mention the original story she was erasing. She started with the obvious symbols. The architectural lobby installation I had designed, a kinetic sculpture mapping real-time logistics routes, disappeared first. In its place stood a minimal gray monolith, with the new logo laser cut into the surface. The receptionists traded their sharp navy uniforms for pale, indistinct tones. Even the company's internal dashboard changed, my efficient color-coded alerts replaced by washed-out gradients that made urgent issues look politely optional. From the outside, it looked like a natural evolution: new marriage, new era, new aesthetic. Investors posted congratulatory comments about synergy and fresh vision. No one seemed to notice that every change made the company less distinct, easier to overlook. Less mine. I watched it unfold through public updates and internal leaks from people who still owed me quiet favors. The new wife suggested removing the case studies I had written, calling them too technical. She replaced them with glossy lifestyle imagery, featuring Arthur in carefully staged candid shots. She reorganized the website so that the patents page, once the heart of our story, was buried 3 clicks deep behind generic marketing copy. It would have insulted me once. Now it just reassured me. You do not repaint a building whose foundation you control. You let the new decorators cover the cracks with whatever shade they like, while you hold the deed. She thought she was painting over my fingerprints, turning the empire into her canvas. She never noticed that beneath all that gray, the ownership lines had already shifted, traced in ink she would never think to read. Arthur waited until after the board left to open the box. The meeting had run long, full of cautious questions about market headwinds and integration delays. He brushed them off with the same smooth confidence that had once charmed me, assuring everyone that Whitfield Technologies was stronger than ever. When the last director's footsteps faded, he closed the conference room door, set the old wooden jewelry box on the polished table, and smiled to himself. "This is what you walked away with," he muttered, almost amused. "Memories." He released the tarnished latch and lifted the lid. At first, it looked exactly as he expected. The chipped ceramic mug, the faded photograph of my grandmother standing in front of a small house, a tangle of cheap costume jewelry. He pawed through them with careless fingers, the way a man sorts through a drawer he intends to throw out. Then he saw the envelope. Cream paper, my handwriting on the front, precise and unhurried. 2. Arthur Whitfield, current occupant. He frowned at the wording, then tore it open. The document inside was brief, 3 pages, clipped together with a black binder clip. He read the heading once, then again, slower. Notice of ownership transfer and execution of prior assignments. His eyes moved down the page, tracking terms he did not remember approving. Reference to a holding entity he did not control. Citations of assignment agreements signed years earlier. buried beneath paperwork he had never bothered to read. Language confirming that the core patents, trade secrets, and proprietary algorithms underpinning Whitfield Technologies had been legally vested in a separate trust. My trust. By the second page, the color had drained from his face. The pen in his hand left a small ink mark where it stalled over the signature block, my name printed neatly above a date that predated his entire offshore scheme. The small black drive lay beneath the letter, tucked where the false bottom once concealed it. He picked it up slowly, as if it might bite. A yellow sticky note was wrapped around the casing. Plug into your personal terminal. No password needed. Old habits carried him to his office, to the sleek monitor that recognized his fingerprint, to the sense of invincibility that had followed him for a decade. He inserted the drive. The system chimed once, and a single window appeared. No buttons, no options, just a progress bar. Account migration in progress. His private banking app logged him out mid-refresh. The portfolio dashboard froze, numbers flickering before resolving to zeros where balances had been. Alerts began to stack in the corner of the screen, red and insistent. Unauthorized transfers detected. Access revoked. Credentials invalid. The bar on the unknown program reached 100%. A final line appeared. Thank you for your contribution to the Thompson Trust. Arthur's laugh started, then caught in his throat. For the first time in his carefully curated life, his hands shook over his own keyboard, watching a future he thought he owned vanish into a mechanism he never knew existed. All from a box he had believed was full of relics. They did not drag him out. Whitfield Tower did not do scenes. Everything was handled with the same quiet efficiency I had spent a decade perfecting. 2 security officers in tailored suits waited outside the boardroom while the chairwoman read the resolution, her voice steady as she cited sections of the bylaws Arthur had skimmed at best. Emergency vote. Majority transfer of controlling interest. Immediate removal of Arthur Whitfield as CEO and chair, effective upon acknowledgement. He tried to laugh at first. A misunderstanding, he said. A temporary glitch. His lawyers would sort out the clerical error about the patents. Then the legal team slid the documents across the table. Copies of the trust assignments. Confirmation from the bank that his personal accounts were under investigation and frozen. An opinion letter from outside counsel, affirming that the person now holding rightful voting control was not him. The room stayed very quiet. When he finally stood, the performance was gone. No easy charm, no polished jokes. Just a man realizing that every door in front of him now led somewhere he did not own. Security did not touch him. They simply walked one step behind as he crossed the lobby, past the gray monolith his new wife had installed, past the reception desk where the staff looked diligently at their screens. Outside, cameras waited, not for him. For the announcement someone had leaked about a leadership transition at Whitfield Technologies. Reporters called his name. Arthur kept walking, jaw tight, ignoring the questions about recent developments and, quote, shifts in intellectual property ownership. A black car door opened. Closed. He was gone. The silence that followed felt like a building exhaling. 10 minutes later, the same doors parted for me. No red carpet, no fanfare, just the soft click of my heels on the polished floor, and the faint hum of servers somewhere above. The receptionist nodded, eyes wide, already informed. The security officers stepped aside. For the first time, my badge did not say guest or accompanying spouse. It recognized my credentials and turned the light green. In the elevator, I watched the numbers climb, floor by floor, the city shrinking below. My reflection stared back from the brushed metal. Same sharp bob. Same black blazer. Blue eyes a shade colder, yes, but clearer. The boardroom doors were still open when I arrived. The chairwoman stood, the others following her led. Papers lay neatly stacked at my place at the head of the table. Miss Thompson, she said, voice respectful, no hesitation. Welcome. As of this morning, the filings are complete. The trust has been recognized. The patents and voting shares are in your name. If you are ready, we would like to proceed with confirming your appointment as Chief Executive Officer. I took my seat, the head of the table I had spent years orbiting. Let's be efficient, I said, and a few people smiled at the echo. We have an empire to restructure. Outside, the signage still read Whitfield Tower. That would change in time. Names on glass were easy to swap. What mattered was already done. The architect had finally claimed the building. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.